Upside Down in the Middle of Nowhere, Chapter 8. I want to see the puppy, Amani, Colleen said. Her name's Cricket. I set the puppy down on the ground and she went to Colleen right away. She sniffed his little pudgy barefoot toes and came running back to me. Cricket ran to each person and sniffed, every time coming to me afterward like she needed to make sure I was still there. Everyone was laughing and I was having the best birthday ever. Out of nowhere, a small dead tree branch flew right in front of my face. If I wouldn't have ducked when it did, the splintered branch would have hit me right upside my head. That's when I first noticed how hard the wind was blowing, and the same trees that had been swaying and bringing me comfort the day before were looking like giant dancing house crushing monsters. Pin prickles spread across the back of my neck. Goodness gracious, Meemaw said. And Cash, then I think we should take these children inside. Mama looked up at the sky. Mr. Curtis, she said, never taking her eyes off the changing sky, how much longer until that jambalaya is done? Before Daddy could answer, a paper plate full of chips flew off the table and danced across the yard, getting lost up in Mama's grapevine. Just then, Denisha and Bugger's gonna be stepdaddy, Mr. Charlie, came running up into the yard, breathing like he'd run all the way from Mississippi. I scooped up Cricket. T-Bone! Mr. Charlie hollered and ran over to where Uncle T-Bone was standing, stirring the jambalaya pot. Hey, man, what's up? My uncle said. Mr. Charlie looked around the yard at all of us. Don't y'all know what's going on out there? He pointed with his thumb towards our fence. Spit flew out of his mouth every time he said something, and his eyes got narrow like little slits, and he started shaking his head back and forth. Charlie, calm down, Daddy said, stepping closer to the man. Mama walked over with Colleen planted on her hip. Are you hungry, Charlie, Armani? Get Mr. Charlie a plate. Mr. Charlie mumbled, No, ma'am, I won't be staying. He kept his fidgeting with the dirty ball cap on his head. I need to get back to my place. They're all waiting for me so we could head out. He turned away from Mama and looked real hard at Daddy and Uncle T-Bone. I scooched out quiet to the other side of the big tree. Ain't y'all got no sense? Mr. Charlie whisper spit at Daddy. Looking over his shoulder at his kids in a lower, not so spitty voice, he said, Look, man, I ain't trying to scare y'all, but the mayor's telling everyone to get out of New Orleans. It ain't been y'all been watching the news? Like the weather was trying to help make the man's point. The wind gushed in the yard, causing half of our slide to blow and flap and making slapping sounds. I held Cricket a little tighter. Out of the corner of my eye, I seen Mima and Mama gathering up the little ones and shooting them inside, and Miss was standing off by herself smoking a cigarette, trying to hold onto her tangerine hat. Tay turned off the house pipe and stood over by the screen door, and she waved her hand for me to come on. I gave a little "I'll be there in a minute" signal, and Cricket's nose was all snuggled up against me. Daddy took a hold of Mr. Charlie's elbow and led him to the other side of the jambalaya pot, and I put all my focus on my ears. Slow down, Charlie. Tell me what's happening. Daddy's voice was calm, but his words came out in a hurry. Charlie took a deep breath. About an hour ago, Mayor Nagin came on the TV and ordered an evacuation of the entire city. My stomach twitched and tightened up. I seen Georgie. I could tell by the way his mouth was hanging open that he heard the evacuation word, too. They're telling everyone to leave. The hurricane's a Cat 5, bro. Y'all best get the kids out of the nines. There ain't much time. Mr. Charlie was talking fast, and spit was flying all over the place. I could barely keep up. Something bad was happening, something really bad. Category 5? Daddy asked. Are you sure, Charlie? A Category 5 would wipe out New Orleans. I started to breathe faster. The tree started to bend further. Man, Uncle T-Bone said, shaking his head from side to side. This happens every time. They tell us it's going to be a big one, and it turns out to be nothing but a storm. I don't do nothing but cause confusion and cost money I ain't got. You know what I'm saying? I felt the tug on the back of my shirt, and Celie was standing there behind me. The girl was wearing a bathing suit that was a silly book sack strap. The girl was wearing a bathing suit with that silly book sack strapped to her back. The whole body was shivering and her teeth were chattering even though it was about 200 degrees outside. I wanted to tell you, I wanted to yell at her to go inside the house with Mama, but I didn't want Daddy to know I was listening in on this conversation, and I took a hold of her hand instead. Uncle T-Bone put his head down and walked in a tight circle, kicking the ground. He stopped and looked at Mr. Charlie. Evacuating? You mean to tell me they expect everybody to evacuate the city? You gotta be kidding me. I'm so sick of this bureaucratic crap, man. He went back to walking in the tiny circle, this whole time shaking his head and kicking grass. I gave Seely's hand a squeeze and snuggled Cricket up under my chin. That's what I'm saying, T, Mr. Charlie said. It don't look good, man. I'm serious. Y'all need to get them kids somewhere safe. I can't. Daddy was rubbing his head with his eyes squeezed shut. I don't have room for Catherine and all the kids in my truck, and I've got Mama Jean to think about. Look, man, Uncle T-Bone said, we could load up my car too. You know I ain't going to be leaving you hanging. T-Bone, George, look, y'all don't understand. Mr. Charlie shook his head. The mayor can say, leave New Orleans all he wants. Y'all won't never get out of the city now. It's too late. The man sounded pitiful, standing there shaking his big old hanging head, talking in circles, looking at the ground. Daddy nudged Mr. Charlie's head up, real gentle like, so he could see the man's face. Charlie, what do you mean it's too late? There ain't no leave in New Orleans, George. Nobody can get out of the city. Not nobody. Ever since the mayor ordered the evacuation, there ain't nothing but wall-to-wall cars on the interstate. And the longer Mr. Charlie talked, the higher his voice got. I talked to a buddy of mine from Gentilly about 30 minutes ago. He left at 10 o'clock this morning and still sat so long, but he ran out of gas. The interstate's deadlocked. He turned his car around and came back. The only ones who made it out is the ones who left yesterday. The smart ones left Friday. A gasp came from the bushes. There was Georgie with his hand over his mouth and his eyes all bugged out. I knew he was thinking about the Babineaus by the way he looked at me. My heartbeat was pounding up in my head. No one said a word. Daddy stared up at the dark clouds and raised across the sky. They waited too long to tell us this time, Mr. Charlie said, and let out a long sigh. Why did you say you're leaving, Charlie, if no one can leave? Daddy sounded tired. Oh, I'm leaving, all right. I ain't going to be caught with my pants down. I'm taking my old lady and the kids and getting somewhere safe while we can. We ain't staying down here in the lower nines, man. Do you know what's going to happen if them levees break? Daddy cleared his throat. His eyes were heavy, and I still don't understand where we're going. To the Superdome, bro. Lots of spit went flying. They're calling it refuge of the last resort. Can you believe that? He nervously laughed. Radio says anyone who can't get out of the city can come hang out in there till the storm passes. My old lady packed us some food and drinks, and she figured it'd be best to stay at the dome, just to be safe, with all the kids and all. Mr. Charlie shook Daddy's hand. Look, man, I gotta go. He gave Uncle T-Bone a handshake hug and patted him on the back. Don't stay here, T. It ain't gonna be good, man. Seriously, go to the dome. Then the man left as quick as he'd come. Nobody moved or said a word, and we all stayed put, pondering on what Mr. Charlie had just said. The old screen door slammed shut, and Kayla turned into the yard, but all but tripping over her own clumsy feet. The lights turned out. Daddy, the lights runned out. Oh no, Daddy said. I think we just lost power.